Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Resistance Live for the 3rd of December, 2019. Woo! You're like, adjust myself a little bit here. How are you all? I hope you're well. Welcome. Couple quick announcements before we get to some news. Many of you have probably seen that we announced a new program for 2020 this morning on Twitter and Facebook, and we'll put the details right in Patreon for all of you as well. It's a new year-long program we're calling Healing the Heroine. Which is to be a deep dive into healing trauma, finding your voice, finding ways to overcome systemic oppression and move in the direction of creating a better world for all of us. So I'll make sure the details are up, but we're really excited about it. And it is the only virtual programming that we are planning on doing as of now in 2020. And so it's really designed to kind of catapult all of us out of the place that we've been and into the election to start a new decade with a roadmap for creating a better world and all that other good stuff. So if you are interested in learning more about the program, and again, I will dump all of the details into a separate post on Patreon. You can check it out at GaiaLeadershipProject.com/healing-the-heroine. Okay. So I'm going to start with the good news first, which is that there was a ruling this morning, again, yet another ruling out of the Second Circuit that supports the requirement that Trump turn over or actually rather it's the Deutsche Bank turn over Trump's financials to two committees who are investigating him. And the great news about this particular set of events is that it confirms everything that we have already seen from the standpoint of the Mazars decision, two prior decisions now in the Second Circuit, and the fact that the president is not above the law, and neither are those who he's done business with. So quick just reference point for all of you. Please remember that this is in federal court. This is a case that has been ongoing for quite some time. It is likely to be appealed to the Supreme Court. And, want to remind you all that, as with every federal court action that has taken place here in the Southern District of New York, the Deutsche Bank decision has been appealed to the Second Circuit. It has now been ruled on that Deutsche Bank must turn over Trump's financials to the oversight committee, and any committee that is investigating, by the way, his financials. There's two committees in particular at issue in this case, but as you all know, there are multiple subpoenas out there now for documents related to Trump's financials. This case is the third now in federal court to say that entities that have done business with the president, banking entities, accounting entities, must turn over his financials to the House. So again, very positive ruling here, but yes, for those of you who asked, it is in federal court. It will be appealed to the Supreme Court. This particular ruling this morning gives 7 days for a notice of appeal to be filed. Excuse me. My expectation is that we'll have an appeal notice filed by tomorrow morning, as was the case in the decision that was reached last week. So again, this is all on a fast track. I want to remind you all of that. My expectation actually is that these cases may be consolidated in front of the Supreme Court should the Supreme Court decide to hear them. Reminder here as well that there must be compliance with subpoenas in general when they are issued to other entities. So this one is kind of a no-brainer. And if the writ of certiorari is granted here, it's going to be a no-brainer decision by the Supreme Court. I'm going to remind you all once again that a ruling that the president doesn't have to comply with a subpoena would be extremely bad precedent, or for that matter, Deutsche Bank would be extremely bad precedent for any subpoenas that are issued going forward. So here we are again with the Second Circuit ruling again that an entity associated with the president must turn over his financials. So there's nothing fundamentally that is surprising about this decision. It's really another no-brainer. And again, I will just let you all know that in the event that the Supreme Court decides not to take this case, the lower court decision stands, which means it does become controlling precedential authority. So again, we don't know what the Supreme Court's likely to do here yet, but my expectation is that we will know very, very soon. And, I'll also just mention that the Supreme Court is having a conference about whether or not to take up a prior ruling on this sometime this week. And so we'll know very soon whether or not the Supreme Court intends to review these cases or whether it intends to let the lower court decision stand. So more good news, in other words. All right. We had, the only way to describe it is like an absolutely deranged set of press conferences this morning from the NATO summit with the president. They included the president referring to Adam Schiff as a deranged lunatic in a global press conference, rather, with Emmanuel Macron. He threatened another trade war with China this morning, which caused the markets to drop by 500 points. There was a whole series of just absolute off the rails commentary about ISIS and sending ISIS fighters to France. And Macron said fundamentally, you have to get serious about this. Fundamentally, with where we are right now, I'm laughing because it's an international embarrassment, and humor is a coping strategy. But what we've seen so far is really quite eye-opening. And not surprising at all, but just like I'm sort of out of adjectives this morning. These pressers are continuing. He's had 2 hours and change in front of the press so far today. So I'm not expecting that any of it's going to be any different. And, I will say that, Macron appears to be prepared to counter all of this. I'll also just add that, there was some breaking news yesterday after we were on the air that the president was considering 100% tariffs on certain goods that were coming in from France. We learned this morning that the reason for that is that Emmanuel Macron apparently just repeated some comments that the president made in January of this year about potentially withdrawing the U.S. from NATO, to the effect that Macron was basically like, we can't count on the U.S. any longer to support our defense agreements. And Trump lost his mind at Macron confirming what he had already signaled, and apparently, then threatened, a tariff on all incoming French goods, not all, but some incoming French goods, which, by the way, will be paid by us. So, French cheese and wine. Not to mention other things. So all of that is quite wacky. And I'll just add that in addition to all of this, the press conference this morning also just had the president on display as, fundamentally an absolute dick. You should go watch, I'm sorry to use the pejorative language, but, you should go watch it, because he really was just a complete dick to Macron. And in that way of it being just completely unbecoming to speak to one of our allies that way. It's quite wild. So anyway, that's that. And I don't really need to give it any more attention other than to say it's still our crazy president. Someone from Norway actually asked me a question this morning on Twitter that was like, okay, I'm from Norway. We're on the border with Russia. What is going on over there? And I was like, I'm sorry. There's millions of us working to get him removed from office and to make sure that he doesn't cheat in the 2020 election. We're sorry. It's just like, there's not much else we can say other than that he's completely deranged and he's owned by Putin, and that combination is deadly, literally deadly in some instances. Okay. Anyway. All right, on we go. There is a signal coming now that there is an IG report coming out from the DOJ that will completely clear Lisa Page of any wrongdoing. You all remember we talked yesterday about Molly John Fast's piece in the Daily Beast that came out on Sunday night, profiling the situation with Lisa Page, giving her voice for the first time. She's been silent until now. There's a reason for that, by the way, which is that you can't talk to the press for 18 months after leaving her position. She's gone now. But in any event, the circumstances in which this is all developing includes the fact that she is going to be cleared by the DOJ. Apparently, Bill Barr is not happy about this. This, again, is like yet another signal that Bill Barr is not really the Attorney General of the United States. He's the Attorney General of one, namely the president. And we don't know what that's going to mean. But the Inspector General's report apparently is going to clear Peter Strzok and Lisa Page of any wrongdoing whatsoever, which is not surprising, because the only allegation that remotely could have stood against them was a Hatch Act violation, and they are entitled to their personal opinion about a president, just like every single person is. They didn't do anything wrong in their official capacities at all with regard to the president or any investigation into the Trump campaign's work with the Russians. So, we'll have to see what Bill Barr does next. We already know that he's on a mission right now to really do the president's bidding with regard to various aspects of the 2016 campaign, including trying to clear Russia so that sanctions can be lifted, including investigating all sorts of other bizarre conspiracy theories out there in the world. I'm expecting more of the same from Barr, frankly, because I'll just mention, by the way, that until he's gone as well, the rule of law in this country is going to continue to be eradicated. So we kind of have to keep an eye on that for the time being. But the good news, I suppose, from the standpoint of where we sit, is that the DOJ Inspector General's office is still doing its job. And we'll see what Bill Barr has to say or do about that in the coming days. All right, couple questions that we had about pending impeachment. I'm going to remind you all that last night, the House Intelligence Committee made their report on the hearings that were held over the last month available in the SCIF. Various Congress people and senators are reviewing it now. It is going to be released later on today. That, of course, you can expect is going to be a news barrage. My expectation is that this will be something along the lines of an evidentiary summary of what we got in the testimony. I described this to you all before Thanksgiving as likely being something that looked like a summary judgment brief that we would write in a court of law. It will form a basis for the articles of impeachment. And it may actually, we don't know yet whether or not it includes this, but it may actually include recommendations for what those articles of impeachment should contain. So that is going to drop later on today. Now, a couple questions that you all had. One of you asked a question about why is the GOP so confident? Well, look, I mean, I have reminded you all many times of that old axiom in the law that when you don't have the facts, you pound the law. When you don't have the law, you pound the table. What is happening here is that they are pounding the table because they don't have the facts in the law. It's all fundamentally posing and bluff. And they are being called out by it now. I've been grateful to see this much more by the media than they were in the past, when they were repeating Russian talking points, when they were perpetrating lies. There was a bit of breaking news late last night that the Senate Intelligence Committee, in fact, investigated under Richard Burr, the GOP-controlled Senate Intelligence Committee, investigated whether Ukraine had anything to do with the interference in the 2016 election and cleared them. There's a report that the GOP wrote itself in Senate Intelligence, clearing Ukraine of any interference in the 2016 election. And yet, members of the GOP continue to go out there and perpetrate these lies. So their confidence is not legitimate confidence. I want to make that very clear. And I will also just add that I think we have to understand that as we get further toward an impeachment trial, the scenario that we are in is likely to change. And some of that will be because there will be evidentiary rulings by the Chief Justice about what is relevant admissible evidence and what isn't. So the standpoint of where we find ourselves right now is one where we have to understand that there are a lot of white male GOP folks standing up right now claiming that the president has been exonerated. There is a report, in fact, that some members of the GOP have written claiming that he's been exonerated. It's a load of bullshit. And we fundamentally have to see it for what it is. Oh, here comes Sophie barking at the front door. Sorry. In the end, in the long run of this, we really do have to kind of see it as it is. It is not a legitimate perspective. There is the possibility, and this is getting to the next question that one of you asked, that we will be in a situation where there will be a push toward an acquittal vote. I'm so sorry. A push toward an acquittal vote for the president. And, one of the things that I just want to discuss here is that I am not counting the chickens on that. I have said for quite some time that I am not convinced that this is all going to shake out the way that the GOP thinks it's going to shake out when we actually get to a trial. One of the reasons for that happens to be that this adoption now by the GOP of these Russian talking points is starting to push even some of the most loyal members of the Republican Party away from Trump. And I said this, but I've heard from so many of you since Thanksgiving that there has been an ongoing onslaught from some of you in your own families in this regard, because, older folks remember having to hide under their desks at school because of a threat of a Soviet annihilation. There is a point at which the enemy is recognizable, right? And the more that they parrot Russian talking points, the more that is shouted out, the more that Tucker Carlson does again what he did last night on Fox News and claim that he wants sanctions lifted against Russia and that Russia is a friend and not an enemy. the longer that goes on, the harder it's going to be for the GOP to hold it together. So I'm not, again, we have a long road to go now between now and the end of an impeachment trial. Let's hypothetically, one of you said, well, in the event that he's acquitted, what do we do then? Meaning, like, how do we combat the talking points? The claim that the president is going to say that he's been completely vindicated. I'm not crossing that bridge until we come to it, frankly. But let me just say this, if that's the situation that we end up in, it's going to be very dire circumstances for the United States of America, like flat out. And I've said this all along. I have said this from the very beginning that, if he is acquitted in the Senate, all bets are off for the 2020 election. So, I'm not worried about combating talking points in the event that happens. I'm worried about putting pressure on people now, because if he gets acquitted in the Senate, and again, I'm going to tell you, like, past is precedent, because when he thought he was off the hook with Robert Mueller, the very next day he initiated this effort to leverage aid to Ukraine for interference in the 2020 election. If he's acquitted in the Senate, we really have no way of predicting what's coming next, but I can guarantee you that it's really not going to be good. Everybody who's been like, he can't cancel an election. We'll see. And this is one of the reasons why I've been saying to all of you, you really need to continue calling all the moderate senators that you can and doing it all the time. Now, some of you said to me this morning that you're getting hung up on. Call anyway. Like, I'm really serious. Like, we all need to have a tougher skin about this. We need to keep calling and call back if we are hung up on, to reiterate that we are Americans, and that anybody who's going to be voting on this in the Senate is going to be deciding the future of democracy and the stability of this country. We absolutely must keep pushing forward to leverage the Senate GOP, particularly the moderates, to come forward and say, this is unacceptable, this is inconsistent with American democracy, and we're not going to let it stand. I'm not at a place right now where I want to think about what happens if he's acquitted in the Senate. I'm also, by the way, I'm just going to tell you this, not convinced we're going to get there, because if the crazy behavior keeps up between now and the end of an impeachment trial, let's say in January or February, I'm not sure we're not going to have a major push for resignation behind the scenes or overtly from the GOP. So again, long way to go between now and then. My message to those of you who are worried about future talking points is to please focus on now. All right. So that's it for today. Reminder to all of you, we did announce this launch of our new year-long 2020 program this morning called Healing the Heroine. There is a post about it on the business page on Facebook. There is a post about it on Twitter. There is a post about it on my personal Instagram. I'm going to dump the details of it into Patreon now, but it is a year-long investigation into how to uncover the heroine within yourself and to heal trauma and work toward making the biggest impact that we all can in the world, personally and collectively. We're going to have expert interviews. We're going to have monthly calls. It's an incredible community opportunity. We're here doing it because we've seen so many of you who've been struggling so much with old or current trauma in the administration as a result of the administration's actions. And what we really want to do here is find ways to excavate the experiences that we've all had and move forward together for the next decade and beyond to really build a world that is equitable and just for all of us. So please check it out. Healing the Heroine. I'm going to post the details inside Patreon, and there's information everywhere. There are scholarships available. There's payment plans, but it runs for the entirety of 2020, and we're super stoked about getting as many of you into it as possible. All right, much love. I will talk to all of you tomorrow, regular time. Please make your phone calls today. All right, bye.